Welcome to the CPM Customer Success Podcast, where we help Office of Finance leaders enable an exact solution to enhance their corporate performance without spending countless nights and weekends in the office. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Smetana from Nova Advisory. Nova Advisory is a 100% OneStream professional services diamond implementation partner. We help OneStream customers and prospective OneStream customers get the most out of their OneStream investments. For CPM Customer Success listeners, we now have a weekly email newsletter to keep you informed on the latest CPM Customer Success news. By subscribing today, we'll keep you informed on episode releases, including customer success stories, OneStream interviews, and capabilities to keep you up to date about OneStream's unified platform for finance. You can check that out now at Nova Advisory's website, novaadvisory.com/podcast, and subscribe to the CPM Customer Success podcast newsletter today. Okay, we're up and live. So today we've got a returning guest, Dave Collins. Dave is the Director of Strategic Alliances at OneStream Software. Dave, you've been on about quarterly for the CPM Customer Success podcast. Love having you here, and welcome back to the show.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Well, today we want to dive into a topic that we just wrote a blog article about, and that is a question that prospective OneStream customers keep coming to Nova Advisory about, and that's financial consolidations. Where should that live? Should it live in OneStream or a CPM application, or should it live in an ERP? So since we just recently covered that, I thought in that blog article, I thought it might be great to dedicate a podcast on this topic and just kind of get your perspective, Dave. So let's just dive right into this. I know you've got a career kind of thinking about this problem. So let's start with the basics. So we are talking to finance and accounting professionals, but financial consolidation is just to level set us. Can you just give us kind of a quick overview of financial consolidations, why it's so critical to organizations and enterprises, and especially as it relates to financial reporting?
So financial consolidation or close and consolidation, there's a close process, a consolidation process. Consolidation is what it sounds like. It's consolidating numbers in a particular form or fashion dimensionally per the business model. So if I'm a CPG-based company where I'm doing consumer packaged goods, or if I'm a manufacturer, or if I'm, telecommunications, I'm going to have a different dimensional model. And the formal financial consolidation and adjacent to that, the close process is typically about regulatory or statutory function, meaning that I have to produce a 10K, a 10Q, an annual report. I have to tell the government what I'm doing. I have to do taxes, tax provisioning as an example. I have to do lease accounting. I have to worry about all of the legalities of owning a company. And so financial close and consolidation is a fairly, honestly, rudimentary process that follows a set of rules, guidelines that are provided by a government entity. If I'm a privately held company, I still have some of the same needs because I have loans coming from banks that have regulatory considerations, or I may aspire to be a publicly traded company at one point. OneStream's publicly traded has been now for a year, and for 2 years prior to that, we were operating internally as though we were a publicly traded company. So we were getting ready for that time when we were going to be out there in the public and part of NASDAQ. In conjunction with that, you have the way you actually manage the company. So there's the consolidation that I need to do for reporting to government entities, regulatory bodies, the banks, and so forth, which is fairly formal, actually very formal. And then there's the way that we actually manage ourselves. And so the managing of ourselves may be more associated with my plan, my budget, my forecast, my growth trajectory, and less associated with what the government is wanting to know. And I have to maintain both of those. And that'll be core, very key, very critical to a discussion around, well, should I be using my ERP system or should I be using a performance management system? And the answer is you're using both, because the performance management system is all about management, regulatory, statutory function. It's typically summarized, meaning it's not at the transaction level. And then how I transact my day to day business tends to be more of what you see in the ERP.
Awesome. Love the explanation, Dave. Appreciate that context setting. So as we kind of think about typical organizations that are they have a consolidation, they have probably many entities because we're talking about kind of large enterprises. What kind of challenges might they run into if they're consolidating across multiple entities or even across multiple systems?
It's a good question. So, one big consideration is ownership. You might fully own some of those entities, partially own other entities. You might be doing an acquisition strategy where you're bringing entities in that are going to, over time, become 100% owned versus percentage basis owned. And so a consolidation system needs to be cognizant of that. Think of those as attributes of the entities. Do I own this entity? Do I not own this entity fully? And you have to recognize that as you're doing the statutory consolidation so that you're not overestimating, overburdening your bottom line number based upon 100% ownership when in fact you don't own it 100% of that particular entity.
Okay, perfect. So if you have, several companies, they're going to be handling an ERP based consolidations. I think that's just a typical kind of experience. People think that ultimately getting to one ERP would be helpful in that regard. But when you kind of think about your experience in your career, Dave, where do you see ERPs falling short in terms of financial consolidations?
Another good question. So I've worked with a handful, maybe two or three organizations that were on a single ERP. And you always have the question, should we consolidate our ERPs into a singular ERP? And that brings up a whole hornet's nest of political questions. Because if I'm in a highly acquisitive company, Teledyne is a customer of ours, they consolidate, if you will, using financial consolidation in OneStream. And as the story goes, or as I remember it, they have more than 35 ERP instances below them. I think UPS was more than 80 ERP instances below them. And that's because in both cases, they were acquiring to grow. And so when you acquire an organization, you're bringing the systems along with. One advantage of a OneStream or any performance management solution should be that I can acquire data from multiple source systems, bring it together, unify it, and then provide an enterprise view of the organization. An ERP in and of itself is not going to provide that enterprise view. It's going to provide a transaction view for whatever it's supporting. So if I'm Teledyne or UPS, where I have multiple ERPs, I might have one per department, or I might have one per geo or geolocation, and that simply provides an not even an organizational view, it provides an operational view of that entity for those points in time. When you then start to look at what it takes to do a statutory or regulatory consolidation, it's not the same. It's not the operational side of it. It's where it begins, but then how I roll up that very detailed data to reflect revenue, sales, and so forth. So, for example, if I look at something like revenue recognition, what does that mean? So, companies like Best Buy, Target, Walmart sell gift cards. Well, according to, I think it's regulation ASC 606, which is all about revenue recognition, you can sell the gift card for 20 bucks, 50 bucks, 100 bucks, but that's not revenue. From a regulatory perspective, a statutory consideration perspective, that's not recognized as revenue until it's actually used. And so if I buy a gift card for $100, those organizations can't recognize that revenue until I actually go back to the store and I use it to do a transaction to buy something with it. It's money that is yet to be used, therefore it's not revenue. Same thing is true if you're looking at the entertainment industry, the gaming industry, where you might get a comped room or a comped meal. Those are not considered revenue, so I can't write that off as $100 for dinner. And all of those rules, all of those regulations essentially sift that operational data into the proper buckets so that when you're reporting it to a government entity, a regulatory body, everything is where it needs to be so that you're not overstating, for example, what your revenue or your expenses might be. Overstating revenue is a bad thing, especially from an investment perspective, but overstating expenses can be a worse thing because I can use those expenses to my advantage from a tax standpoint.
Yeah, so I want to kind of shift it to risk, and Dave. So if you think about kind of some of the risks that could be hidden if you try to consolidate in an ERP, what might be some of those hidden costs or risks that an organization might find?
Sure. So you're going to consolidate in the ERP, but it's a different kind of consolidation, right? So if you think of an ERP, you have ledgers, and there are sub-ledgers, there's the general ledger. And if I have multiple ledger systems, multiple ERPs in the organization, I'm going to have to go from sub-ledger, which is typically subject-based. For example, I might have my sub-ledger for AR, for AP, so accounts receivable, accounts payable. All of those are modeled for that particular function. And then eventually that data makes its way into the general ledger, not at the same level of detail, but at a summarized level of detail. Then from there, it would go to the consolidation system. Now, a couple of things about ERPs, generally speaking, and I'm not a deployment person with regard to ERP, but I've connected to enough ERPs over the years to know that you can't have multiple hierarchies in an ERP, meaning that I can't have the statutory way that I roll up my account structure versus the management way versus next year's management way versus the operational way. Most of the big four, little four, the global advisors that we work with will tell you that I should keep my ERP skinny, meaning I should not try to overburden it with multiple ways of looking at the same data. Just let it focus in on the operational view of that data. To do anything other than that introduces one set of risk. Then you use a very specific solution, performance management solution for closed consolidation. In the old days, meaning a few decades ago, there was always the question of, well, okay, I have that solution for doing my financial reporting, my close, my consolidation. Should I then push that data back to the ledger? That introduces another set of risk because I've brought the data from the operational system to the closed consolidation system, and there's an audit necessary for that movement of data. Did we consume all the data? Did we leave some of the data off? In other words, if I look at revenue, is it equal to revenue? Is the revenue in the general ledger equal to the revenues that are coming from the subledgers? That's one gate that you need to get through. And then the next one is, does my revenue in detail, is that reflected in my closed consolidation system? If I then push that view back to the ERP and use the ERP as a data warehouse of sorts, I'm introducing another level of risk by way of that movement of data. What should happen in a leading practices fashion is that the data is always making its way from the bottom toward the top, and it stops at the top. Think of it as a pyramid, where at the top of the pyramid is the answer to the question in summary, and then I can drill down, drill down, drill down, maybe drill through to that source system to see that detail in all of its glory. If you're trying to use systems for what they're not intended to be, you're going to inherently introduce risk. If you're going to be doing additional technical debt, meaning additional movements of that data, you have to make sure those movements are done properly. You have additional risk. Not to mention the time. The amount of time it's going to take to move that data all around becomes quite a challenge. It reduces efficiency. It has a potential for reducing accuracy. You want to eliminate all of those risks if you're the CFO, because you don't want to be in a position where you have to restate your numbers per here in the United States, Sarbanes-Oxley, as an example.
Yeah, and I found that in my experience, oftentimes IT as a function of an organization really owns that movement of data, and so it's a call to them to move the data around, to maybe write reports to validate that the correct data has been moved, and that just adds up and builds up the technical debt you just talked
Yeah,
about.
and to that end, think of IT as being very, very good at making data movement happen without necessarily having a good understanding or appreciation for why that might be a bad thing. And so one of the challenges I see doing deployments is making sure that we're representing the business need, and that can be, let's have a discussion about risk, versus the technical need, which could be, well, I know that I always move data and I always move data back and I've always moved data back. So we need to have those discussions and be transparent about why that data movement can actually introduce cost and risk. And today it's something that we refer to as technical debt.
Awesome. So, can you now provide us, Dave, just some illustrations and examples, maybe of OneStream customers that have really helped the organization add value through the consolidation process in a way that an ERP really might be restricted or really couldn't handle the same kind of logic?
Sure. So one of the things that you see with an ERP solution or set of solutions is they tend to be very modular. And if you think of AP, AR, um, dealing with expenses, all of those different modules are literally separate applications that are all strung together, and there's data movement taking place among them. There's a lack of unification. There's a high amount of fragmentation. I have separate applications, therefore I have the data movement, which typically incurs technical debt. Our approach to performance management, and this is not just about consolidation, this is also about non-consolidation. When you think of financial planning and analytics, when you think of management reporting, when you think of even operational reporting, we blend all of that together. We unify that into a single application. So the good news is when you're doing a consolidation, first step is I want to bring the data into OneStream, in the case of OneStream. We have a data quality engine that allows us to connect, much like an ETL tool, extract, transform, load tool, to acquire the data directly or indirectly. That's a matter of preference. Sometimes IT doesn't want you to connect directly to their underlying system. Sometimes they're okay with it. We provide capabilities in both regards. I'm going to connect to that data. I'm going to bring it in. The challenge from a quality perspective is really around the viability of that data. So, for example, I talked about subledger and general ledger. Oftentimes, we'll pull in from the ERP subledger data that should, in summary, match to the general ledger data. And our data quality engine can actually ensure that that's the case. So if I'm looking at revenue from the GL and I'm looking at revenue coming from the subledgers, are they equal to each other? If not, there's a problem down at the ERP system in the data movement there. So we'll look for that. We'll actually establish a workflow, if you will, that will disallow the ability for us to move forward. A logical next step might be to do a currency conversion because I'm a multinational firm. I'm bringing in local currency from the subledger, general ledger. We need to do a currency conversion. We might need to do some intercompany. So if I have a manufacturing group, and think of in the tariff discussions we've been hearing all around us, GM, for example, has parts that become assemblies that become products. Sometimes the parts are being made in Canada. The part then comes over the border into the US to be assembled together, and then it's sent back to Canada. And the tariff discussion has to do with that movement back and forth. Well, there's cost associated with that. I need to track that cost so that I understand what the cost of goods sold or goods produced might be. OneStream will deal with that intercompany activity without having to build a rule because there's a natural organizational hierarchy that allows us, or we can take advantage of, so that I know if I have intercompany between two entities, I'm going to actually take care of that at the first common parent. So OneStream has built into the metadata model configuration capabilities around currency conversion, around intercompany, around calculating to date versus periodic. All of that is inherently built into the system. Whereas a lot of the other performance management solutions I've worked with, you have to build rules to make all of that happen, which means that you're not getting the value of a performance management solution. You're getting the value of a data model where I'm going to teach it how to do performance management. I'm going to teach it how to do consolidation activities like intercompany and more. The other advantage of a OneStream is that if I need to do lease accounting, if I need to do tax provisioning, if I need to do various functions that are common within the realm of financial close and consolidation, and I'll talk about close in a moment, they're simply solutions that you plug into the application that are available in our solution exchange. When you look at close, something like account reconciliations, transaction matching. Transaction matching is an example of what I talked about before with a gift card. I have a transaction for purchasing the gift card. I have transactions for actually using the gift card. I match those so that I can then bucket the revenue associated with the consumption of that gift card. When it comes to account reconciliations, I have bank activity that I'm bringing in, not necessarily bringing into the ERP, but in the ERP, I have a ledger of bank transactions where I was writing checks and so forth, and I have to match those up so that I can actually rationalize my checkbook, if you will, to use a personal example. All of those solutions are ready-made and available in our solution exchange. So we're unifying not just the data for various functions, we're actually unifying the function. And now we're unifying a lot of automation capabilities by way of artificial intelligence, machine learning, so that something like account reconciliations, the matching can be done by the computer, or suggestions for matching can be done by the computer, so we drive greater efficiency versus, okay, now it's time for the person to go look for all of these things that are not matched and try to figure out what the matching is. We can actually let machine learning and artificial intelligence take a first stab at that, and then we're approving that process. So we'll greatly reduce the amount of time it takes to get through that close process, which is always a goal of the CFO.
We've covered a ton of ground here on financial consolidations. I think you've kind of hit on why OneStream is really purpose built to handle financial consolidations, and you touched on things like intercompany eliminations. But maybe you could talk a little bit about other aspects where a OneStream or a CPM application can really help an organization versus an ERP. And things that come to mind are multiple charts of accounts or different fiscal calendars. Can you kind of talk to that and maybe provide some examples,
Sure.
Dave?
So, and I want to clarify one thing. So, when as we're talking about OneStream being ideal for consolidation, it is. And in fact, consolidation is one of the things we do. I also talked about FP&A, and it goes down the path of your question. So when I'm looking at multiple charts of accounts, oftentimes for my actuals, I have one way of looking at the account structure that tends to be a bit more detailed. And when I'm doing a strategic plan, kind of the back of the envelope thing, how much revenue, how much expense, not the detail revenue, the detail expense. Those are two different charts of accounts, two different sets of metadata that all will go to revenue, go to expense, eventually go to something like profit. One of the things that OneStream does very, very well is we solved this problem that has driven many of the other vendors to have a modular or separate application basis, and that is the dimensional model. So if I have 1,000 accounts that I want to track on an actuals basis, but I only have 10 that I want for my strategic plan, how do I rationalize the 10 to 1,000? And looking in between, if I have a budget that might have, say, 150 to 200 accounts and maybe a forecast that has 50 to 100 accounts, how do I rationalize all of that? Not to mention the fact that when I'm looking at one business unit that might be manufacturing oriented, another business unit that might be more service oriented, the types of accounts we're going to be tracking, the dimensional models are going to be different. We have this notion built into OneStream called extensible dimensionality, which is a lot of syllables. Essentially, what it allows us to do is to track on a dimensional basis what we're looking at. What do I mean by that? So, as an example, the manufacturing group, when it comes to the account structure, use these accounts. They use these accounts for actual, they use those accounts for budget, they use these other accounts for my strategic plan. I can do the same thing for services, all within one application. So the ability from an extensibility standpoint really is what drives what I mentioned before, and that is unification. I can unify into one dimensional model by essentially subsetting the accounts dimension, the time dimension, whatever the dimensional construct might be for a given organization. I can actually relate or interrelate those dimensional segments together without having to have a separate set of applications. So, in other words, within an application, we're compartmentalizing the departments by scenarios, by time period. It allows me to do some really cool things like if I acquire a company and we're already in August, so September 1st is when we bring that company online as a legal entity. I can actually timestamp that so the account structure isn't actually relevant, isn't visible until I hit September 1st. I can have a completely different way of looking at my account structure or any structure on a year by year basis, which is all very common as we're trying to solve business problems in the real world.
Yeah, so I'm thinking and tying these concepts back to companies that have an audit requirement, Dave. So you've used governmental kind of audit as example, external auditors, internal audit. Maybe you could talk about how OneStream helps that audit function and why that might be an advantage to an organization versus using an ERP-based approach.
Sure. So first and foremost, the goal of any CFO or Office of Finance is to remove the auditor or the audit process as quickly as possible. Let's get it done. Let's get them out the door because it tends to be a bit of a quote unquote time suck, right? So they have a lot of questions because they're trying to work out and establish the transparency of the organization as much as they possibly can. So two things. Number one, everything that is done, every data movement that is done inside of OneStream is actually tracked. So as I'm loading data in, it's tracked. I know who did it. I know who executed the process. I know what was done in the process. I know what date, what time. I know what the source system was. So all of that is tracked, whether it's close consolidation or somebody going into a planning form and changing some data values or running a process of calculation or using AI or ML to establish a process or a set of data. The other thing that we do is I mentioned Solution Exchange. Solution Exchange is the place that we put ready-made code, if you will, application segments or solutions that can be downloaded and brought into and configured into an application. So there's this whole set of reports that auditors typically need to see. We work a lot with audit firms, audit techs, consulting compliance firms like the big four, like the little four. And so we have a lot of insight into what they need to see. We also have on staff a lot of folks that have been in the Office of Finance, have been the CFO, have been the controller, and they have a lot of insight into what those auditors need to see. So really a two-pronged approach. We're providing a lot of visibility to what's going on inside of the application, and that visibility can surface itself either by querying directly or asking a question of the application, or you can use the ready-made reports that are available and just hand them off. And many of the big four, little four, or smaller audit firms that we work with that we consider partners help us to drive those. So they know what they're looking for, and we've just pre-built that, which creates an advantage for our customer. They just need to run the report or allow the auditor to run the report, and then they can, again, get finished with that audit process and out the door as quickly as possible. And a third thing is, again, that unification. Bringing everything into one application means that I'm looking at the one thing to do my audit. I don't have to audit all of the data movements that are going on because within OneStream, there's one data movement, and that is from the source system into OneStream. Once that data comes into OneStream, it's not moving around in the application, it's simply referenced in the application.
Okay, so I want to come back to something you touched on earlier, and that was the acquisition. And I think your example, Dave, you said, organization can kind of time date their hierarchies, add a new acquisition, and then that becomes effective as of like September 1st. So I'd like to just kind of expand on that. And can you just talk about companies that have a growth strategy of M&A, how they can use a OneStream in their consolidation, how they can take advantage of the capabilities of OneStream in that kind of process, and how that helps them keep agile and moving their business
Sure,
forward.
sure. So first, I mentioned Teledyne, and there's a great Teledyne case study on our website that talks about their procurement process. And so underlying a performance management solution at the ERP level, at the subledger level, you're going to have a procure to pay process, procurement. So what is procurement for those that are unaware of what that word means? I'm going to go buy something and I need to track it. And so at Teledyne, as the case study goes, with more than 35 ERP solutions, they have more than 35 procure to pay processes that are all separate from each other. So there's no enterprise view of procurement. What was happening prior to OneStream being introduced was if somebody in Department A wished to buy something from vendor one, they could do so. And if somebody in Department B, Department C, Department D wished to buy something from vendor one, they would do so under separate contract. And none of that had been tracked so that they could see what sort of volume was in place, meaning could I be getting a volume discount? So as part of the consolidation and close process, I have to bring my expenses in. I have to bring that source data and all of the metadata in so that I know which vendor I'm actually interacting with, what's the cost associated with it, what department, what was it that was being purchased. And one of the things that they discovered was that they had a lot of contracts with the same vendor instead of one contract with the vendor. Now, procurement typically would love to know about that so that they can go back to the vendor and say, right, these 10 contracts, we're going to rip them up. We want one contract with you and we want a 20%, 30%, 40%, whatever the discount rate needs to be so that we can be more efficient with the use of our expense. With OneStream, they gained insight into that by simply creating some reports that allowed them to see where they were spending their money. They immediately handed that data off to procurement, and procurement renegotiated terms. And in their words, at one of our conferences a few years ago, they talked about saving dozens of millions of dollars per year. And all of that was because they were able to take discount or lack of discount and turn it into a proper discount, going into the tens of discount percentages. No vendor, generally speaking, is going to say, hey, you're doing a lot of business with us. Let's give you a discount because they're trying to optimize their revenue as well. So it's up to the procurement team to uncover that. That's one facet of it. That helped them to create a much more efficient expense process. The other side of it was, as you pointed out, as I'm acquiring an organization, each of those organizations have their own way of tracking data in the underlying ERP at some level of detail. What they're then doing effectively is just creating a mapping routine from that data into the business model, meaning into OneStream. Let's bring revenue in, let's bring expense in. We'll keep the detail back in the ERP. We can always drill through to it, or we can bring that detail into OneStream to leverage it for reporting, maybe for analytics. But it allows us to have the corporate view of the world with a corporate account structure and other dimensional structure and allow the business units to be themselves. We don't have to force them to look like corporate. They can continue to operate the way that's most efficient for them. The inherent advantage there is, again, I don't need to now consolidate all of those ERPs into one look, one feel. That's where it becomes quite political. I need things the way I need things because I've always done it that way is a pretty common retort when you say we're about to go change things. So corporate has their way of viewing it. They're simply now mapping that data from the underlying detail into a more summary structure so that they can get a good feel for what their revenue looks like, or in the case of Teledyne, what their expense looks like. They brought the detail expense in so that they could actually see the vendor component of it and the discount or lack thereof component of it so they could get proper reporting and then renegotiate all of that.
Love the story. Procurement's one of the biggest areas of potential savings, and I just love hearing how the OneStream reports made them more efficient and identified that.
Yeah, and even better,
So
they
do you
actually
have
put that together in 3 weeks. So because they had the
love it?
data, right? They were able to bring that data in. Then it was just a matter of putting visualizations against the data. And one more thing on that, the person in IT that helped the business person to construct that in OneStream actually left Teledyne and created her own consulting firm that focuses on nothing more but procurement.
I'm gonna kind of stay on this kind of major finding that Teledyne found. Were there any other kind of big aha moments that you have heard of OneStream customers or finance teams that, when they've made the shift or kind of realized that OneStream could handle their consolidations? What are some of those aha
So
moments?
the big thing that we've been seeing over the last few years post COVID, now that we're back to doing users conferences and getting customers together, is that we'll start to hear our customers say things in their presentation of their use case along the lines of, I can go home at 5 o'clock now. I'm not working, 3 hours after 5 o'clock to try to get the reporting done, cobbling Excel spreadsheets together. I can go and see my kids play baseball or play basketball or play whatever sport they happen to be playing, or go and watch, my daughter or son play the piano or play an instrument in a band. So that there's a softer side of that efficiency, that time savings that's actually impacting people, which I think is tremendously positive. And it's really all about the efficiency gain from being able to unify all of these fairly complex functions together into a single application and reduce all that data movement and technical debt. We're starting to see, and there's Doug Orsog, who runs our value transformation team, and essentially what they do is they look at where you were before you had OneStream versus where you are now. So how long did it take you to do a close process, to do a planning process, and what's the delta? What's the difference? And so what we're seeing is a tremendous efficiency gain. When it comes to the elimination of technical debt, the data movement, our customers, generally speaking, on average, have improved in that data movement area 72 plus percent. Our customers have reduced their consolidation time by more than 50%. I think the number is 53 or 54%. So that time savings really is a direct reflection of unification, which is a direct reflection of the way we're dealing with metadata, and intelligently so, where we're building function that's relevant to consolidation, to close, to planning directly into the configuration of that data model so that you can get it done as you're building the dimensional model. Set it and forget it. You won't have to worry about it as you move forward. And there's a lot of now machine learning and AI capability coming into play where effectively it's automating things that would typically need a human touch to sift through, to do matches, to go looking for anomalies in the data, to leverage external and internal operational data. External meaning things like consumer price index, gas prices, weather, then use that operational data that's coming in to be part of the close process or the consolidation process to create a much more efficient and accurate forecast. So the real advantage, and I know we're talking mostly about why consolidate CPM versus ERP, but that really scratches the surface of what OneStream as a solution or set of solutions within the application can do. It's tremendously powerful, just that notion of unification. Being able to bring all that together at scale affords us the ability to provide lots of goodness, lots of capability to the customer.
So if you're a finance leader today, Dave, maybe put yourself in the shoes of a leader that's thinking about an ERP. Maybe they have already started a new ERP implementation. What kind of questions should they be asking themselves and their teams as they design out their overall approach, including financial close and
Sure.
consolidations?
So I think starting with CPM in mind is really the thing that you need to do first and foremost, because at the end of the day, anytime you're doing a reporting exercise, you have to think about the report. What is it I'm trying to produce? And then you work backward from it. Okay, I need to produce this report with revenue and expense and profit over time. Okay, where am I going to get that data? Well, back in these underlying systems, perhaps a data warehouse, perhaps ledger systems, the ERPs, if you will, I'm going to work backwards, and there's going to be a mapping effort to bring that data forward. When it comes to that, again, question about CPM, ERP, which one should I do first? You can actually take confidence in doing the CPM first because you know what it is you need to see and how you need to see it, and then the underlying data can simply be mapped. To swap out ERP or consolidate ERPs is a multi-year, 3, 5, 6 year endeavor. So you're not going to see that value as quickly as if you implement a CPM set of solutions within a common application. We've done a lot of work of late, the last year, year and a half, leveraging something called Express, CPM Express. It's a pre-built application that has the typical summary dimensional structure in mind. It has a lot of function built into it, reports built into it. It has CPM built into it that then gets configured. So my time to value goes from several months down to several weeks, where I can get something in place quickly and easily. And so versus a multi-year effort to consolidate all of my ERP, and by the way, I'm not going to be able to do all the things that I need to be able to do, like look at things from an operational perspective and a statutory or regulatory perspective and a management perspective. That's an overburdening of the ERP. And the other thing I would say is that if I'm in finance, work very closely with your advisors, like you all, to talk about actual use cases, where you've been, what you've done, where has it worked well, what mistakes might we wish to avoid. Actually leverage the guidance coming from Nova Advisory so that they can counsel someone based upon their experience. One of the mistakes I've seen customers do when I was in consulting is not pay attention to the consultants who have actually been through the thing and have been hired to come in and provide the experience of being through the thing, not once, not twice, but typically several times. So Office of Finance, I think first and foremost needs to listen to the guidance coming from their advisors, their consulting partners. They also need to hold the vendors accountable for actual use cases, for references, so they can go and talk with customers that are like them, so they can glean that experience and do things right the first time and not have to worry about doing something over again or over again.
Well, as we wrap up, Dave, I'm just curious, any advice, any parting thoughts to finance leaders as they're really looking to future proof their consolidation process? Anything you'd extend or lend to them?
Well, we're very transparent as an organization. I mean, you know that I've been here for more than 5 years now. From a reference standpoint, I just alluded to that a moment ago. We actually provide a big book of references, which has, thousands of contact names in it, phone numbers, email addresses, so that our prospective customers can reach out and have a conversation with whomever they want. The nice thing about that approach is that, yes, we'll cultivate some references that you can go and speak with based upon use cases we're hearing from prospective customer, but it allows you to reach out and talk to others that are in this ecosystem. We're also very transparent on our website, talking to use cases and how it might be applicable. Looking at use cases by industry, looking at use cases by industry, by region, all of that is out there as a starting point. So before even entertaining a conversation with a salesperson, you can start to do your homework, start to do your research, look at Gartner Magic Quadrants. We've been in the leader quadrant now in all areas of performance management, close consolidation, and FP&A 3 years running. That's a big thing. And most organizations, when they're looking for a new solution, tend to look at a Gartner report and start in the leader quadrant, and that's their opening list, if you will. But then again, more importantly, I think they need to be leveraging a Nova advisory, a partner who actually has experience, has the discipline, has been there and done that, and will provide the experience as part of, say, an evaluation so that the customer makes the right decision the first time.
Love it, Dave. Well, I think that's a wonderful place to wrap. Really appreciate your time today, and we'll be in touch here soon in another episode.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, take care. Thanks for joining us for this episode of CPM Customer Success. Reminder to check out the CPM Customer Success weekly email newsletter to stay informed of the latest CPM Customer Success episodes and OneStream news. You can check that out now at the Nova Advisory website, novaadvisory.com/podcast, and subscribe to the CPM Customer Success podcast email newsletter today. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week for another episode of CPM Customer Success.